Hello and welcome to Climate Check with me, Mary Mwiikisa. Now, the Environmental Management Act number 12 of 2011, the EMA Act, is a key piece of legislation that governs environmental protection and sustainable development in Zambia. Now, the Zambia Environmental Management Agency, ZEMA, is the authority responsible for administering this act. Now, does this cover every other violation in totality around environmental issues? The answer is no. And because of that, does Zambia need an environmental court? We will be finding out on the program because we're focusing on the need for an environmental court in Zambia. Join me on the other side. Welcome back to Climate Check. Now, the program is brought to you by HIVOS Southern Africa with a consortium of its partners on this project for strengthening respect for environmental rights project in Zambia. Now, I'm joined in studio to discuss this very important topic by Professor Chipasha Molenga. He is an environmental legal consultant. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, next to him is Mr. Morgan Katati, who is Executive Director for the Zambia Institute of Environmental Management. Mr. Katati, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program.
Pleasure is mine. Thanks.
All right. Now, before we delve into this conversation, we took a trip to Chongwe right here near Lusaka town, and we had an opportunity to interact with Lucy Dende. Now, she is living with a disability, and this is just one of those examples that will show you the impact of climate change on those persons with disabilities and how they need to be assisted, even by legislation. Take a look at her story. Zambia has experienced a major drought in 40 years. The El Nino-induced drought, which has been worsened by climate change, has affected agriculture, food security, and livelihoods. The devastating impact of the drought is more for persons with disabilities. This is the story of Lucy Dende of Chongwe. Having lost all her crop, Lucy reminisces over the good old days when her chicken run and piggery were thriving.
This drought that we had this past season was really, really bad because we do what we call in our village seed banks. We take local seeds and we reproduce them, things like beans, sorghum, and unfortunately we lost most of the crop. So we had to start from scratch. Most of the stuff we had to start from scratch. In these past years, I had a piggery, and we had some broiler chickens, and even the village chickens were more than the ones you see now. But because of the drought, we had to sell all our pigs, we had to sell most of the chickens, and some of the production had to stop because we mostly had to rely on what we were growing to feed the animals. And then maybe a few supplements here and there which we bought from agros, but about 80% of our produce on this farm was supporting the animals. So we had to get rid of the animals. But even in the course of getting rid of the animals, we got a hammer mill, because where we were going to produce our food, there was no more electricity. So we couldn't make feed for the animals or for ourselves. So we had to sell off all the animals, and the money I bought a hammer mill. But even though we did buy a hammer mill, still we had the problem of what are we going to mill?
Even the hammer mill business is not yielding much, as most people in her community lost their crop, which means very little grain to grind.
We lost 80% of our maize, grains, things like sorghum, our soya, our groundnuts, and I guess almost everything. We didn't even harvest any beans this year. We only had a few leaves which we dried for future use. And even the seeds, we didn't get as much seeds as we would get on the other years where we would make seed banks. I can say we have lost a lot of crops. We have lost our animals, and I've also lost workers because I couldn't pay them what I was supposed to pay them because I didn't have anything anymore that I could manage to pay them. So I scaled down from about 15 workers to 5 workers. And even now, I'm still struggling to pay those workers because of what happened with the drought.
She is calling on those responsible for causing harm to the planet to pay for the loss and damage so that vulnerable communities can adapt.
Already disability is an issue. It's a big challenge in itself. But with the climate change coming in, it's now a new game altogether. And then I've noticed since this climate change has been happening, my body is fighting to adapt. It's different from the years before where my body would adapt to the weather and you know that it's cold, so your body adapts. But now it's so hard. It's so hard. And I've noticed I'm now taking twice as much meds than I used to because of the weather. So it's really, really tough. I feel that those countries that have contributed to ruining our world, they should have there should be some sort of compensation to countries which do not contribute so much damage to the environment.
For now, Lucy Dende can only hope, and hope for the best. Mary Mwiikisa for Climate Check in Chongwe. An interesting story of Lucy Dende and how the drought that we suffered in 2023-2024 farming season impacted her life and how she is trying to cope, as you could see from that story. Now, let's get back to our conversation. Does Zambia need an environmental court? And I'm joined in studio once again by Professor Chipasha Mulenga, environmental legal consultant, as well as Mr. Morgan Katati, executive director, Zambia Institute of Environmental Management. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. And I'll start by asking you, Professor, does Zambia need an environmental court?
Absolutely. I think Zambia needs an environmental court like yesteryear. I think what has become a challenge over the years is the fact that when you have environmental cases that come up, the biggest issue has been on whether these cases have been properly handled. So I'll give you an example of some of those cases. Starting back from the James Nyasulu case, which was a 2006-2007 case in which the residents of Chingola sued Konkola Copper Mines, Mulonga Water Sewerage, as well as ZEMA. Then it was being called Environmental Council of Zambia. So you see that the approach that was taken at that time was one that would fall in the broader realm of what you'd call the law of torts. And this was principally because at that time, the Environmental Management Act had not come into effect, and therefore they were relying on the piece of legislation that was existing then, the EPPCA. Now, when you look at that case, you will find that much as everything else was settled, not the way in which an environmental case should be handled. So the court had no option but to delve into the law of torts, which is limiting in itself. And though they gave an award or they gave a decision, a judgment and a judgment sum, on appeal, this was reduced on account that, well, there was nothing like proof. Because in the law of torts, you must prove that first of all, there was a duty, and then this duty was breached, and then there was damage that ensued. And in some of those cases, it was found that the damage could not be proved. And this reduced the quantum of damages, which then forced others to escalate the issue in the name of Dominic Liswaniso suing now Vedanta as the holding company of KCM, and then a decision made in the London Supreme Court.
I remember last year in 2024 at the launch of the SR for ER project with your partners, you are on record having given an example of the lead poisoning in Kabwe, and you intimating that we should have had a better way of handling it if we had an environmental court.
Yes, indeed. Because when you look at the Kabwe case, reasonably, the time when the cumulative pollution were happening in terms of reed having to accumulate and spread over almost half of the entire Kabwe city, there was no legislation in place, and there was no institutional arrangement in place. So at the time when this mine was decommissioned, that's when the legal framework were put in place.
Okay.
So what that means is that liabilities which were created that time cannot be litigated because there are principles. There's a principle of retrospect.
Okay.
So what that means is that you cannot sue over the matter that was committed before the law was put in place and that law entered into force. So literally for Kabwe, at the moment there's nothing they can do with the current legal framework we have, unless where we have a specialized court that will call for legal review.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, as a country at the moment, do we have legal provisions that address environmental violations, even if we don't have a court? And how efficient are these pieces of legislation?
Yes, maybe I will start with that one. When we look at the Environmental Management Act, is we would say that is kind of divided into three parts. There's a first part which deals with environmental management, meaning how we manage the environment as a resource, how we manage other resources like land, water, air, and all those. So there are rules and provisions that are sitting in the Environmental Management Act. Then apart from that, there's another component that deals with the rights, because the provision within the Environmental Management Act has got a component that deals with protection of rights. So in an event that there's an industry or a developer goes to ZEMA to apply to utilize water, then it is the duty of the regulator to ensure that the right to utilize that water should not sit on other people's rights. Okay. So that right is actually an environmental right itself, which is also pronounced in the Constitution in Article 255, and is also provided for in the Bill of Rights as well. The only challenge is that this right cannot be enforced entirely, especially when it relates to the state, because it becomes non-justiciable.
Okay.
So these are the challenges that are there. So because of these rights, because everyone has a right to clean and healthy environment, but these rights cannot be fully prosecuted by, for example, one institution who is a regulator, because the regulator is responsible for ensuring that facts are provided and also monitoring and also compliance on the industry side. But what happens now when somebody's right is abrogated, but then he goes to the court? So if he goes to the court, then he has to tag along the regulator to provide a proof that indeed this right was violated beyond reasonable doubts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Professor, let's pick an example, a recent case on the Copper Belt where Kafue River was polluted and the environment by the Chinese company that's operating there. And this company is in Zambia because it passed through all the processes of operating a mine in Zambia, and government gave an operation license to this mine. In view of what happened, where there's cases of heavy metals which have long-lasting impact on people's health, we even hear of traces of uranium now. Some of all these conversations are coming out, some are undertones, and it's a never-ending conversation. Do you think in such a case, the people can take government to court or the mine to court, assuming we had the environmental court? Would that have helped?
Definitely. I think the issue of one of the things we mentioned is that Zambia has been a mining country for over 100 years. And if the recent reports that we get from the ministry is anything to go by, then you know that mining will still be with us for quite a long time to come. And in these mineral processes, different chemicals are introduced in order to extract the metal.
Yes.
And some of these chemicals are actually very toxic. For example, some of them include arsenic compounds. For example, just a little bit of it could be very fatal. Therefore, this requires now enforcement. So then the question becomes, if there is a pollution, as happened at that time, certain things come up. Number one, are the communities aware that they could actually take action against the mine, for example? Two, if the community is quote unquote compensated, is that compensation adequate? Now, in light of the framework and the way it is, yes, the law would, so now it means that the Environmental Management Act needs to be read together with the Mineral Regulations Commissions Act.
Okay.
So that you now balance it up. So you see that there would be a provision, for example, under the MRCA, there's a provision which allows even communities to take action and so on and so forth. But the question is, if the community decides to take action, what route are they using? So if you go strictly by what obtains, they are likely to go under a different route, which would be the route of torts. Now, in torts, until you have proved that there's a duty which was breached and the resultant damage, you cannot get compensation. You must get it. Now, when you talk of environmental law and the environmental principles, for example, there's a principle of the precautionary principle. Okay? And the precautionary principle basically tries to stop something from happening without the need for you to prove that you suffered damage.
Okay.
Provided scientific evidence would lead to a situation where you would say that the impact would be this. So it anticipates. Now, in Zambia, what has never worked is the so-called the polluter must pay principle, which the Environmental Management Act holds on to dearly, which the Constitution also mentions. The polluter here in Zambia may not really pay. So the idea now here is, if you have a specialized court, such as the environmental court, for example, the rules can be structured in a way that even the community can take action without really the need for them to start proving.
How possible is it to have an environmental court in Zambia? Is the process complicated? If not, why don't we have one?
Yes, indeed. The process is not that complicated. First of all, if you look at High Court Acts and also other acts that gives power to the Chief Justice, so the Chief Justice has the power to introduce the court.
Okay.
So what is needed is, in this case, there are always reasons that compels the Chief Justice to introduce a court. Some of the reasons are political reasons. Our political wing of government can decide to say, okay, we want this court. For example, the Economic Crimes Court.
Yes.
That came through a political window. The political leadership of this country said, I think we need this. And that court was introduced. Then the other one would be technical or injustices that are coming from the community. So meaning the people, the Zambian people must have an opportunity to reach out to the Chief Justice and write and give reasons why they think this court should be introduced. So the procedure is there, and all it needs is just to get enough support from people that this court be introduced. And of course, maybe from judiciary point of view as well, they also want to see to it that their cases are going into the court, to make sure that judges are not just seated and they are not receiving anything when there are other judges elsewhere who are overburdened. So I think...
and this is why you come in as civil society. What are you doing about it?
Exactly. So what we are doing is we started late last year to collect signatures.
Okay.
What we want is to ensure that we kind of create what we may call a petition. So we are still undertaking this process. We want us to collect as many signatures as possible. And also, after we get that petition, before we render it to the Chief Justice, we would like also to engage the institutions, the technical wing of government, with institutions which includes also regulatory authorities and any other institutions to consult, to get opinions so that we get enough support. And that is the stage where we are.
Okay. Prof, what do you recommend at this stage? What would be your advice to government and the interest groups around needing an environmental court?
I think the advice would be that the court is needed as soon as possible. And this is stemming from the fact that now the situation is changing. For example, you do have other things that are coming in. Initially, we were talking about just the environment, but then there are other things that are coming in like climate change. And this is something that can also be dealt with. Other countries are even doing what you call climate change litigation. In Zambia, we also have done a bit of environmental litigation. And if we look from the hindsight and just to weigh in on what you were saying earlier, some of the decisions that have come from the court, you can really see that if these were dealt with by an environmental court, the outcome would have potentially been different because of the nature of the court. And if we have done it before for certain courts, such as the one that's dealing with children, the one dealing with labor issues, dealing with financial crimes,
yes.
economic and financial crimes, why not an environmental court? Especially that we are coming from a history, if we look back a leap in history, we are coming from a history where environment was not something that was regulated until about 1990. So it is a field that, and it's a specialized field that people are gaining interest in. And you can even tell that some of the decisions and the judges that have sat on it, you can tell that there is interest in this field where the judge maybe goes out of their way and says, well, when I'm looking at this case, though it has come to me in this manner, if it was packaged this way, the result would have been different. But because this is not the way it has been packaged, I will not say anything about it. So you can see that there is also that growing need and the growing desire. And like we've said, sometimes environmental cases, they linger for years. For example, you spoke about the metal, or is it the pollution and in the copper belt. Today you can be compensated, that's fine. But what happens if that compensation, with years to come, it proves to be inadequate? Or you now have the consequences of what happened in 2024 following people 30 years later. You spoke about the lead pollution. That's exactly where the problem comes in. So the need cannot be overemphasized. We need it.
All right. We'll have to end here. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing this valuable information with us. And we do hope, Mr. Katati, that as you collect those signatures, eventually we should be able to see an environmental court in Zambia. And like he said, it's about time. All right.
Indeed.
Thank you so much. This is Climate Check. We'll take a short break. Join me on the other side. We have come to the end of the program for this week. I will be back next week, same time, same channel, for yet another interesting edition of Climate Check, where we focus on creating discourse around climate action. My name is Mary Mwiikisa. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.